Start the clock.
Good afternoon. At the tone, time will be
Real time.
From the top of its game to the front of the tabloids, it's the first prime-time interview since the allegation that the mitochondria was responsible for Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy. It wants to set the record straight, shooting down the rumors about its destructive behavior and the scandal it created.
As an organelle, I have to speak.
It says it's a good organelle, but what about those people blinded by dead optic nerves? What about the mutated mitochondrial DNA? It's mitochondria you hadn't seen before. In the first ever MedLine exclusive, the mitochondria is speaking out.
I'm not perfect, but I'm not that guilty either.
Good evening. We're here with the MedLine exclusive. This is how we know the mitochondria best. From its double membrane powerhouse that takes highly reduced species and oxidizes them to push electrons down its chain using ADP and its partner phosphate groups to ATP. The ATP that power all other areas of the cell. More recently, however, you're more likely to see the mitochondria like this. With a single nucleotide substitution mutation in its circular chromosome resulting in LON. Until now, the mitochondria hasn't had a lot to say, but now, within this candid, emotional, and shocking interview, the cell's most cherished organelle talks. It says, "I'm not perfect, but I'm not that guilty either."
Hi Mitochondria, thanks for joining us tonight. So can you tell us a little bit about the allegations against you?
Initially, it was that Lon had a pattern of mitochondrial inheritance. It was a vague conclusion based on pedigrees and observations, and it quickly surfaced that there was a specific mutation, a guanine to an asparagine substitution at 11,778. Honestly, I don't even know guanine at 11,778. I don't know if it's true, but I really don't think I should get the blame for the whole disease. I know there were other people at that party that night at Complex 1. I specifically saw chromosome X.
So what did happen that night?
It was seriously the party of the year. The party was at Complex 1. All of the hottest organelles in the cell were there. It was seriously a rager. X chromosome and I had been drinking pretty hard.
So just to be clear, you and X chromosome were both there.
That is correct. We were both there. Anyway, we were getting pretty denatured. At one point, X chromosome went outside with another chromosome. I think some non-homologous end joining was going on, but who's to say? I wasn't there. X chromosome came back down after a little while. I was downstairs hanging out with Bulgy, just having a good time. Chromosome X and I got pretty hungry, so we decided to make a grilled cheese. So we started cooking some food. Next thing you know, Complex 1 is up in flames. I mean, up in mutation, like the whole thing is mutated. And I turn around and X is gone. I thought, I gotta try to handle this mutation, so I tried to put it out. Proteins and organelles were everywhere. The place was a total mess. I tried to get out as fast as I could. DNA repair got there a little while later to put out the mutation, but it was just too late. X chromosome was gone, and I was there, and I got blamed for the mutation. I honestly don't know if it was me or X. I just don't remember.
So how does that make you feel?
Honestly, I just feel really embarrassed. I'm devastated that someone could accuse me of doing something so terrible for humans.
Well, that's quite a story. We weren't able to get hold of X chromosome for comment, so we won't have that side of the story just yet. But when we get back, we'll be talking with someone else who is intimately connected with the events of that night. Welcome back. Tonight we're getting the exclusive from Mitochondria, recently thought to be the main cause behind LON disease. We brought in another special guest who's been intimately affected by the incident as well, ADP. Welcome, ADP. Thanks for joining us tonight. So can you tell us how this scandal has affected you personally?
Well, it hasn't really affected my relationship with the mitochondria. We might even be closer now, but there were other organelles that felt differently. There was so much chaos, there was uncertainty, negative publicity, and they didn't want to be associated with it, so they took off.
We've heard you were fairly close with proton gradients. Is that true?
Yes, and he was one that took off.
So can you tell us how this has affected you?
Well, Proton Gradient was my best friend. We did everything together. We were dependent on each other. And since he's been gone, I'm not happy the way I was before. I can't seem to get phosphorylated anymore. My friends used to call me ATP when I was phosphorylated, and that nickname has just died out. I'm just ADP.
So, were you at Complex 1 that night? And did you see X chromosome there?
I was at the party at Complex 1, but I spent the night with proton gradient, and I didn't see mitochondria or the X chromosome, actually. The first I heard of the mutation was when DNA repair showed up to try and put the mutation out.
Okay, thank you, ADP. When we return after the break, we'll be bringing on another special guest who is taking photos at the party at Complex 1 and who may be able to implicate X chromosome in the scandal.
3, 2, 1.
And we're back. We just talked to ADP about the scandal surrounding mitochondria. There's a mutation in Complex 1, and for a long time afterwards, we knew that mitochondria's DNA was at least partially responsible for the mutation. We now would like to welcome Dan Berger, a special guest who has recent evidence that X chromosome may also have been involved in this mutation. Please welcome Dan.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, Amanda.
So Dan, what can you tell us about the events that night?
Well, Brendan, I actually have photographs of X and mitochondria both at the scene of the crime that night. It was thought that for a long time afterwards, since mitochondria was hanging around to try to deal with the mutation when DNA repair came on the scene, that it was solely mitochondria that caused the mutation that led to Lon. This is actually not true at all. We actually see that X and mito were both at the scene of the time. Now, in a broader sense, this mutation in Complex 1 has larger complications than we originally first thought. So what we do know is with this mutation in Complex 1 now, those high energy electrons that were at these parties, they're diehard partygoers. They're seen at every Complex 1 party, and they're often seen at multiple complexes every night. Complex 1 through 4 are even hitting ubiquitin in the meantime. They're all now hanging out at Oxygen's house since they don't have a Complex 1 to party at. Oxygen in the presence of these electrons is simply too much of a radical to remain in the cellular world, and retinal cells are simply apoptosing because of this.
So let me get this straight. There's a mutation in Complex 1 of the electron transport chain. And this mutation caused electrons, instead of passing through the electron transport chain, to pass directly to oxygen. And oxygen, with all these electrons, became way too radical to remain in the cellular world.
That's correct, Brandon. And since they're too radical to remain in the cellular world, the cell just apoptoses. So that's what creates the blindness that we see in Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy. But anyway, back to the photographs I have. I found it interesting that Lon is seen more often in males than it is in females. So I thought that kind of implicated X a little more, and sure enough, looking at the photos, both X and mito are definitely there, definitely cooking food together. Both of them definitely had a hand in the mutation. So I think this further implicates that X was as well a part of the mutation and not just mitochondria here.
So mitochondria, how do you feel about this?
Well, Brendan, I came here to talk about the scandal and why I wasn't solely guilty. This is great news because it tells the cellular world that it's not me alone that may have caused Lon. Like I said before, I'm not perfect, but I'm not that guilty either. I'm glad those pictures came up because I've been in the spotlight for far too long. I think it's X's turn to share the spotlight. It's time the facts were set straight.
Well, folks, this has been quite the interview. We've talked to mitochondria about the allegations surrounding the scandal that mitochondria was solely responsible in the mutation that causes Lon. We also talked to ADP, who explained her relationship with the mitochondria and proton gradient. Finally, we talked to paparazzi, who caught photographs of both mitochondria and the X chromosome together the night Complex 1 was mutated. And we now know that mitochondria isn't totally responsible for the damage caused. I'd like to thank all the organelles and proteins tuning in tonight to this exclusive, and I'd like to thank mitochondria and our other guests. Next week, we'll catch up with someone who said they saw proton gradient in ATP in the Bahamas. Tune in next week, folks. Good night.